Okay, everybody, do you want to come have a seat? Thank you. Okay, so welcome back. So this is the first of our panel discussions today, dealing with the fairly simple, light topic of Brexit to start with. And the panel will very kindly introduce themselves in just a moment. But it's just to say, to make you aware, we are actually doing a sort of live stream on Facebook Live, courtesy of Mr. Whiteside here.
Hopefully.
So just to say that if you are asking some questions or making a point, can you just make sure that you speak up so that everybody can hear you. So welcome to the panel.
That's not me.
That's the art installation, just beginning, isn't it? Okay, so thank you very much for the panel.
Hi everyone, I'm Norah. I'm going to be chairing this session. I work as a producer for BBC Radio 3 Radio Scotland, but I'm here purely as a personal capacity, and anything that I'm going to say obviously doesn't represent BBC in any way, shape or form.
Nothing to do with me on this side of things. Thanks, Dave.
I don't think the conversation necessarily needs to stay confined to Scotland. I think it's kind of UK-wide because we're still kind of married in lots of different areas. I'm going to keep my phone on the table so I can have a look at timing so that we don't rush over. And we'll probably look at a couple of different topics and then take questions at the end. But there'll be lots of time for questions, so you don't need to worry about comments and things like that. I'll ask the panel first of all maybe just to introduce yourselves and your roles in companies and businesses, and for people who maybe aren't familiar, explain a little bit about it.
I'm Norah Campbell. I'm the head of Arts for the British Council Scotland. Obviously the EU debate has been much in our minds. I'm also the chair of the Scottish Music Centre, and which is an amazing experience and pleasure. And I'm also on the advisory committee for Showcase Scotland, which is part of the a particular weekend at Celtic Connections where we bring in promoters from across the world. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Susanna Eastburn. I'm Chief Executive of Sound and Music, which works across the UK to support and promote new music of various different kinds of genres. We do a lot of work around audience development. We do a lot of work around artist development, work with composers to give them opportunities to explore their talents. We do some work in education. We were actually involved in Ailey Robertson's Echoes and Traces performance, which I saw last night, and I hope that those of you who weren't there last night can see it tonight because it's really amazing. So sorry for the quick plug. Also, I am chair of the International Association of Music Information Centres, which has around 50 members from around the world.
Hi, I'm Geoffrey Brown. I'm director of Euclid. We are an independent consultancy. We've been working for about 20 years across the UK and in Europe to provide awareness and understanding and assistance and guidance to the arts and cultural sector about European Union opportunities, particularly funding opportunities. For 11 years, we had the official contract with the European Commission and the UK government to be the contact point for the previous culture programme. We did that for 11 years. That was quite long enough. We are now completely independent, which is a wonderful place to be. The checks have stopped arriving, which is a bit of a shame, but we can now tell it like it is about exactly what's going on at the European Commission level.
Thanks, Geoffrey. So there was a couple of topics that I was asked that we explore, and the first one, I think, within the context of Brexit, was looking at funding and free movement of artists and the effect that Brexit would have on that within arts and creative industries. Geoffrey, I might start with you by asking to explain a little bit how EU funding works within the organisations that we have in Scotland and the UK as it stands.
Oh, how many hours have you got? Right, okay, in a nutshell, there are two types of European funding. There are the structural investment funds, which are allocated to the regions of Europe on a per capita basis depending on levels of deprivation. For the majority of those, that money is spent simply within those particular regions, no partners are required. And on the other hand, there are the transnational funds, which are opportunities for organisations to collaborate with other organisations in other member states and apply for jointly funded projects. That covers programmes like the Creative Europe Culture Programme, the Erasmus Plus Programme, Europe for Citizens, Horizon 2020, and many others. The situation is slightly different in terms of the future about both of those programmes, but I think that it's, from my point of view, it's absolutely crucial to start by saying that I don't think in terms of EU funding opportunities, it's time to panic yet. We have this magic phrase that keeps being trotted out, which is Brexit means Brexit, which truly must be one of the most meaningless phrases that I have heard for some time. There is a spectrum of Brexit options, and I'm sure you're aware. At one end of the spectrum is the Norway-type model, where we would have some sort of close affiliation with the European Union of some sort or other. And at the other end of the spectrum is the, let's for the sake of argument say, the Nigeria-type model, where we would be completely independent of the European Union. At the moment, I like those because people sort of tend to say independence as in a vacuum, but let's not put it in a vacuum, let's put it like another country. We are at the beginning of the 2 years of negotiation as to what is actually going to be the final model we get to. While we go through that negotiations, as far as funding is concerned, we are still a member of the European Union. We are still eligible for all the programmes that currently exist, and it would be illegal of the European Union Commission or any of its officials to in any way discriminate against the United Kingdom. And while the UK continues to pay its contribution to the European Union, I am sure they will be monitoring the situation extremely carefully to make sure that there is no decline in the UK receiving the appropriate level of funding. So that's the good news as far as I'm concerned. There are, of course, a number of caveats to that. One caveat is that while that is all technically true, the reality is that there is a certain amount of panic setting in, not just within the UK, but within potential partners in other parts of Europe who are all worried about this. I don't know what we can do about it, to be absolutely honest, but all I think we can do as organisations who exist here in the United Kingdom is to make sure we capitalise on what opportunities exist at the moment and which we know will exist for the next 2 years. And what we shouldn't be doing is drawing back many of those opportunities. And I think it's incumbent upon the powers that be who are, for example, supporting the various contact points for these funding programmes to make sure the word is put out loud and clear. The problem is, or one of the problems, is that these contact points are funded by European Commission and UK government in one way or another. And therefore there are some restrictions, inevitably, on what they can and cannot say about the current position. And I think that's a little bit of a challenge. But technically, as far as I'm concerned, it's still all to play for. And even though the Norway model might seem something that is never going to happen, it's still on the table. And until we actually have a final statement saying, well, we're not going to do Norway or anything like it, we are going to be Nigeria, okay, then we have to go on the basis that on the basis of a Norway-type model, we could continue on much the same basis as we are at the moment to participate in European Union funding programmes and opportunities. I'll stop there. I've said too much already.
It's a bit of a funny one because we're trying to discuss something that we don't really know the outcome of, we don't really know the shape of, something that's continually evolving, and so we've got to kind of almost make several plans and see what happens. Susanna, how about in your roles, how do you think funding and free movement of the artist specifically would impact what you do?
Sure. I guess first of all, let's spare a thought for Theresa May and her cabinet, who are right now locked away trying to work out what Brexit means. I was a little anxious about coming on this panel because the one thing that we don't have, sorry, I will get to your question, I didn't need you to go aside, but the one thing that there isn't, and I know you will understand this, that there is absolutely no certainty about what will happen. So whilst we do need to make plans, or we need to think constructively, some ways there are sort of an infinite number of plans for the infinite number of possibilities, and that could be incredibly debilitating for the sector to just sort of try and imagine what might happen, and that could really sort of pull you down. So it's interesting, so in some ways the most constructive response, I think, for us as a sector is to actually just try and be really kind of clear and precise about the things that matter, so that when the time comes for culture to be considered, there's a really clear list of things that need to be addressed most urgently. I should also say, I do not think culture is going to be top of the list of things to do, and that's probably, I have to say, hand on heart, that's probably inevitable. And there are things like trade and indeed human rights, which must be sorted out as well. But culture is important, and so we have to be prepared to be really, really clear about what needs to be addressed. I should say, so notwithstanding we don't know what's going to happen, the impact on free movement of artists and indeed on funding is having an impact already, right now. And those are things I think need to be kind of addressed and looked at and communicated clearly. So, notwithstanding what Geoffrey said about it's currently actually illegal to exclude the UK from partnership bids, a lot of people I'm speaking to, there's always kind of bids sort of on cooking way, and a lot of people I've spoken to have talked about UK partners being asked to just sort of slightly take a bit of a back seat, as they thought they might prejudice the bid in some way. So that's one thing. I've talked to a lot of composers about this over the last few weeks, and one thing that's already having an impact is exchange rates, so it's become incredibly expensive to bring people into this country, and it also becomes very expensive for a UK person to go abroad and spend money, because the pound is worth so much less. People who are engaged in delivering international collaborations right now are having massive budgetary issues, just as the exchange rates are causing things to kind of swing around all over the place. It's very challenging for them. There is incredible anxiety about what the visa situation will be, given that the referendum was, the Leave vote won on effectively a migration ticket. I think there's a fair chance that there will, the scare around visa regulations, I think, is not unjustified, and what that means for the free movement of artists is very serious. So that is something that, we have to be able to make a kind of clear case for. I'm hearing reports already from higher education institutions that their EU students, which are normally a very large part of graduate recruitment, that those numbers are falling. And that's not just because of the money, because frankly it's always been really expensive to study here, and that's not changing immediately. It's actually because they feel the UK is not a very nice place to be. And again, actually as a cultural sector and as an artistic community, there are things that maybe we can do really well that can try and put that right. And that links to the sense of kind of creative freedom as an artist, and actually part of being an artist, being a composer, is how you work with other people, and the sense that if that's confined to being the UK, that's a really kind of restrictive creative life for an artist. And according to the United Nations and cultural, there are creative rights. It is a human right to have creative expression. I guess the last things I was going to say, and we'll come on to this maybe this afternoon as well, I was horrified, as I'm sure you all were, by the murder in Harlow last night, which was a racist murder, which is pretty clearly a direct result of the EU referendum. So the sense of societal sort of fracture is sort of, I think, creating profound anxiety on all of us as a nation. And talking of anxiety, I was talking to a group of composers recently who said that the anxiety they're feeling about Brexit is not a new anxiety, that the sense of lack of control, of lack of resource, of uncertainty, fragility, lack of support, lack of networks is there in their lives all the time. What Brexit has done is shine a spotlight on it and made it worse. So those are some of the things that I've been hearing, and I'm really hoping that this morning, we don't have answers. All that we can do is I can reflect what I've heard. I think we can possibly just pull together some critical things that can be communicated when the time comes to negotiation, because I don't think there are any answers yet about what's going to happen.
Thanks, Susanna. Norah, as both of your
share and endorse what's already been said, but I think from our perspective, that sense of we're still eligible, we're still part of this big thing that is the EU, and whilst we are, we shouldn't allow our voices to drop down in any way. We should still assert ourselves as creative people within that. And things like the contracts that Geoffrey mentioned, we've just signed a contract with the EU to do training and culture in Greece and Turkey and that part of Europe. That's a 3-year contract, and that's been signed. So it's not going to go away. Those things are going to be working away. These things, the need, the connections, the shared knowledge, those opportunities won't die off. But I think from my perspective, from the Chair of the Music Centre, I'm really aware that as an organisation we've been very strong in making sure we're part of international networks. We're part of the IAMIC, we're part of IMC, and we're part of the European Music Council. And the European Council is not defined by the European Union. It is that bloc, that physical continent. And those partnerships for us as an organisation and for those who are members of the organisation and indeed for the sector are really important. And I think wherever we can make those contacts and retain those networks and with like-minded institutions, we really need to, at this point in time, in the next 2 years particularly, we need to make sure that we are strong in our voices in those. It does worry me. It was really interesting, I'm coming in the car today, driving into Glasgow. I heard Boris Johnson being quoted, he wasn't being quoted, it was his voice, saying that we don't want to be a part of Europe, but we want to be part of a strong EU partnership. Now what that adds is interesting, and it sounds like we're playing with words a wee bit listening to Johnson, but I find that kind of interesting that was the last thing I heard before I switched the car off. But I think for me, those network things are really important. From a British Council point of view, the day after, I couldn't actually talk to my staff. I've got 5 members of my team, well, there was actually 6 of us during the festival, but 3 of my staff are from the different parts of the European Union, and I actually couldn't phone them because I knew if I spoke to them I'd cry, then they'd cry, that'd make them feel worse. I wasn't going to help them in any way on that Friday. I emailed them all and said how concerned I was, but the British Council, thankfully, Kieran came out very, very quickly and made a very strong statement about Europe. Our Chief Executive, he says, we've worked in Europe for over 80 years and we're not going to stop now. The difference for us will be how we find our way through all of this and how the bulk of our work in Europe's been around education, working with promoting institutions like this, and making sure students are attracted to Scotland, particularly from our position in the Edinburgh office, but also about teaching English across Europe. And I can't remember how many offices we've got in Europe, there's a lot of them, but that's the main focus. And in a way, it's kind of an opportunity for us to go back to the Foreign Office and say we need to start looking from a cultural diplomacy point of view. I mean, cultural diplomacy comes in different forms, but actively creating opportunities to bring artists together across the EU. And that's something I know our senior teams are looking at in connection with Westminster, because they're literally sitting on the doorstep of that. And we've had some really interesting kind of discussions since all of this kicked off. I think it was about 2 months ago. Actually, it must have been now, because I don't know where the summer's gone. It's just gone like that push. But in June, when we launched our art strategy, the art strategy says art connects us, and that to launch that after hearing about the referendum result was quite poignant, and I think it's even more important than ever that we work at those connections. But there was a real sense from people in that room from across the sector who attended that morning in Edinburgh that this situation we find ourselves in isn't just the UK. There are these strange mixed feelings in Greece, there are in Italy, and different parts of the world about being part of a bigger institution as it was or is as in the EU. So I think there's a lot going on that we need to be aware of, that we're probably feeling like we're licking wounds, that we're a wee bit worried and all the rest of it. It's happening everywhere, and it's an opportunity to make those global contacts stronger. I really believe in that.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because again, going back to my point about the sort of infinite number of possibilities, some of my European colleagues through IAMIC are strongly of the belief that Brexit will trigger other countries leaving impossible to a much wider change across the European Union. So again, it's another element of uncertainty about what will happen. There's a strong appetite for similar referenda in the Netherlands, in a few countries over Europe.
And in Scotland. I mean, you know, I think this is one of the problems. I think that, you know, as Susanna quite rightly said, the breadth of options is in some way so vast that I think it is extremely difficult to plan for those until we are at least a little bit clear of what is going on. I think there are two things that really, in my view, the arts and culture sector needs to focus on. One is being completely pragmatic and maximising whatever financial opportunities may still exist. And the second one comes under the generic heading of lobbying, okay, in terms of making a case for whatever sort of option or options you would prefer to see as part of the Brexit package. And I'm not based in Scotland. I couldn't begin to sort of say how that is best done in Scotland. But given the situation, the unique situation in Scotland, I think there needs to be some sort of strategy for individual organisations and networks and others about how to best lobby for the sort of scenario that is going to be most effective for the arts and culture sector. And in many cases, that scenario is going to be most effective for many other sectors as well. I don't think, you know, the freedom of movement of people or certain aspects of freedom of movement is not just something that arts and culture are interested in. In fact, probably the arts and culture sector is one of the best at managing to do that, whatever the circumstances. I mean, you know, we are undertaking collaborations and projects all over the world without being part of the United Nations of the world, whatever it might be called. So that's all happening. We're very good at that. But I think we have the potential to join with others outside the arts and culture sector, not just political parties, depending on who they might be, that you support, but with others to lobby for the sorts of key fundamental principles that we want to see as part of any Brexit negotiations.
And I think many organisations in Scotland, not just in the music sector, but across the different art forms and the creative industries, should be clear in what they want, articulate clearly as groups or individual groups, and feed that back up through organisations like Creative Scotland and you know, that's happening in Arts Council Wales, it's happening in Northern Ireland. All these institutions are starting to gather that information, are starting to gather a sense of what the impact already is on the work that's being done. We know that the National Galleries have tried to buy work, that they were in negotiation and buying, but of course they changed the value of the pound, suddenly made that impossible. So things are happening already out there financially, but I think if we can feed up to these organisations, have a strong voice in what our core values are about working across Europe, then I'm sure that will help negotiations, because there's no point in kind of sitting back waiting to find out what somebody else is going to pass down to us. We should be trying to feed up those thoughts to the relevant organisations. Sorry, David.
No, I was just going to say, just suddenly reminded me, I know this is pathetic, but you know, one is desperately searching for silver linings amongst these clouds. One tiny silver lining, which I thought was quite entertaining, was that, of course, the value of the €200,000 grant from Creative Europe went up by £25,000 the day after the referendum result. I just share that with you. Please apply.
I mean, kind of being devil's advocate, I was looking, I noticed that Theresa May said she wanted UK to focus on opportunities outside the EU, and kind of, instead of glass half empty, looking at the opportunities that might be available for collaboration, for funding, and all that sort of thing. And do you think we could maybe be doing more globally to shout about what we're doing?
Does she think that's not already happening? That's a large question. No, I don't think it's very interesting. So I'm from Cornwall, at the other end of the country, and that's a district which strongly voted leave. I was there last week. You can't move things that were paid for by the EU. And it's very, very painful. And I have leave voters in my family, which is very painful as well. And their question was this as well, about kind of, well, without the EU, it would be much easier for you to work with people outside the EU. And it's like we do already. And all the things that make that hard are nothing to do with the EU. It's to do with kind of costs and things like that. But I think, I guess we could always work harder, but I think people are trying to do that all the time already.
Well, Scotland is well represented in the out in Rio just now, and the Brisbane Mexico is one of our biggest projects we've ever run as a season in terms of, you know, work from the UK and indeed Scotland being part of that mix. So,
and the British Council's done amazing work to do that. So, you know,
it's a smokescreen, isn't it? I mean, you know, everything came out of that cabinet meeting at Chequers, sorry, Scotland influenced. Chequers was a smokescreen to cover up the fact that there's giant panic attack going on as to how they're actually going to square the circle of taking, you know, nobody wants either the full Norway model or the full Nigeria model. I don't believe anybody really wants that, apart from hardcore voters at either end. But in terms of the government preferred solution is somewhere in the middle. And at the moment, they have no idea where somewhere in the middle really is, and to what degree it's going to be closer to that end or closer to that end. And what they have to do is somehow negotiate amongst all the key players who are pulling at both ends of that. And interestingly, what we have is 3 key Brexit ministers who are in theory, well not in theory, in practice, the lead campaigners. But we have a government, a cabinet that is majority Remain people and heavily influenced by business, the majority of whom want the Remain end of the spectrum. So how is all that going to be balanced? And all this talk about we should capitalise on the opportunities and everything else, well, of course we should. But you're absolutely right. We're doing that every day, and so is every other sector. I mean, business is trying to sell across the world, not just in Europe, and all the rest of it. It's a smokescreen to cover up the fact that they really have no idea of where it's going to end up, and no idea of how they're going to get there, and to keep enough people on board to make it work. And that's the other challenge they have. How they're going to keep enough people on board. I mean, certainly, people at either end, you know, the numbers, you look at the numbers who are hardcore Leave and committed Leave and confused and committed Remain and hardcore Remain, you look at those numbers at the referendum, they've changed. They are now different numbers than they were at the referendum. And what they're looking at, amongst other things, is how they're going to juggle the outcomes of all that negotiation so they have sufficient support across that spectrum in order to take it forward without sort of having a war in the streets or revolution or whatever it might be.
It's also about what's going to be palatable to the EU, because the sort of Norway and Switzerland model, and Norway and Switzerland have never been in the EU, so they're starting from a completely different place. And, you know, we won't be able to automatically, so they have this, I can't remember what it's called, but they have a particular status which means they can be partners in Creative Europe bids and other kind of funding streams, and they have sort of the trade agreements in place, etc. But they've never been in the EU, so their starting point is completely different. So the EU may not, from the language of the EU leaders at the moment, that may not be something that they're prepared to just sort of give up. To say, yeah, you can have all the things that Norway and Switzerland have, that's absolutely fine. They may not do that. I should say also that through EAMIC and talking to my colleague organisations across the EU, those in Switzerland and Norway say actually it's really not great. We're kind of basically always 7 years behind and sort of on the receiving end, and it's just always just much more of a slog to work in this way, not just in culture, but actually across all areas of kind of international collaboration and business.
Moving from kind of, I suppose, a lot of uncertainty of we don't know what's going to happen in the shape of everything. One of the other topics that was interesting was our artistic identity within Europe, and how much artists identify with European or not, and how much a sense of place influences what artists will create, and whether you think that it's important within that context to continue to be part of Europe or not, as it might influence artistic identity.
Can I do some audience participation on that?
Yeah.
I was going to ask, like, if considering yourself as European, if you would put it in, say, the sort of top 3 things about who you are, do you want to put your hand up? That's Oh, sorry. Does that mean you haven't heard anything I've said?
It was really good.
The question was, if you would say that being European is amongst the sort of top 3 of your sense of artistic identity, creative identity, can you put your arm up, actually?
That's nearly everybody.
Not everybody. So a kind of, so does that answer your question?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question, the whole, you know, where we take from what we take from our surroundings in terms of art and our output, and if people are writing based on your surroundings or where you come from or your heritage, and
that comes from the fact that I train in painting. And when you train in painting, you study European masters. That's part of what we do, and I suspect in classical music we do similarly. So I think a lot of it's to do with how you're fed information and how you access all of that. And I had this conversation with folk from Iran at Celtic Connections, and it was Brian and myself, and we were chatting away to these people, and they were saying, well, how do you identify yourself? They were fascinated by the whole the Scottish referendum. And we were saying, well, I identify myself as a Mullah, first of all, Scottish, part of a person from the UK and a European. And so therefore, I think we have multiple identities. Most of us will have more than one sense of who we are, and that will work across different aspects.
Do you mind if I just add to that one of the problems with a few North American voices? It's the question of identity is an interesting one from my perspective, but for me, it really, I hear about my identity all the time. When you talk to me, I'm definitely North American. I'm now an expat in Scotland. But the reason I'm here is because of the European Union. So there's a kind of, I suppose, a kind of technicality about it. It doesn't really matter for my identity. I feel like Scotland benefits from a weird international identity. But the reason that I'm here is because of the technicality of the European Union, which doesn't really broker on identity. It brokers on the fact that my wife has an Irish passport. So to me, I feel like the question of identity is important, but also the question of openness and allowing for all kinds of different identities to sort of factor into what makes up Europe and what makes up sort of local sections of Europe is extremely important as well.
I'm wondering if now might be a good time to start questions.
Can I just say something about the identity thing? I think the identity thing is less of an issue. I mean, people during the referendum, we did various presentations. In fact, I did a show in Edinburgh about this, and you did get a lot of feedback about some people sort of saying, oh, Europe is going to lead to this cultural homogenization. We're going to have this standard culture across the entire Europe, and you sort of point to places that, well, obviously this is not the case in Europe. It seems to me being part of the European Union has not demolished the cultures of individual member states in any way, shape or form. Scotland being part of the UK for 300 years does not seem to have demolished Scottish culture. Even in the United States, there seems to be, although there may be commonality of McDonald's restaurants, there are individual cultures in different parts of America which may be now more shared and so on and so forth. I think it's a little bit of a, not exactly a red herring, but a sidetrack, because I don't think being outside the European Union is going to have too much effect on that argument about identity. Partly because I'm not sure whether we have I think there's also a question of whether or not we have a European identity or whether we have a Western world identity, which actually embraces also some North American countries, Australia, and so on and so forth. I think there's that sort of part of the whole question. I'm sort of a little bit, I think there's a danger of going down that particular route, because I'm not sure it actually helps the case that needs to be made now about the way in which we might work in the future with our colleagues and fellow citizens in other parts of Europe. I think that's a slightly different question than the question of identity.
If I could just follow on with that. It's clear to me that the Brexit vote was based heavily on the question of culture. Who am I? Who am I not? Who am I in comparison to other people? And that was a big driving force. And we are a room full of the cultural experts. There's nobody else except people like us who are actually dealing every single day with the question of culture and what it means. So we're the experts. And I want to make a general point, first of all, that if we want to, as individuals, do something about the situation that we're at sea in right now, then we are the most empowered people to actually look at the issue of culture and what's happened, what needs to be reconciled and healed, what needs to be redefined. We're the experts who actually do that. The second point is very personal. When I was serving on the board of the European Federation of National Youth Orchestras, they had and continue to have a programme which funds, for example, 2 players from the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland to fly to Spain and work with their National Youth Orchestra. And the 2 players from the Spanish Youth Orchestra fly to Vienna, and so on and so forth. And every year, the orchestras exchange players because, and here's the crux based on movement. It's based on mobility. You can't really call yourself European if you just have one language and live in one country. Now, I chose to live in Germany for 15 years. I chose as an adult to learn German in Germany, and I would call myself a European because I made an effort to cultivate European identity through language and mobility and working in that culture. That's my definition of being European. And it's clear from the European Federation of National Youth Orchestras that European identity is about travel and interaction with other people and other cultures, which is where I think Brexit is a gigantic brick wall, mentally, psychologically, if not perhaps in terms of visas, in terms of the issue of mobility. I mean, an artist who can't move is a dead artist.
Interesting point. And you think that the whole, like, the issue of Brexit, regardless of Schengen visas and things like that, where we might be able to have movement for a couple of months, it might not be permanent, but there might still be movement, that's basically going to put a stop to that and basically make artists be stay-at-home artists?
I think there's already a movement of, I think there's already an island mentality, which means that people stay at home in this country anyway and don't move. When I was living in Cologne, that's a mega centre of mobility. You can take the train up to Brussels in 2 hours. 4 hours in the other direction, you take the trains to Paris. It's a great place to move around. And people in Europe, the central continent of Europe, move around much more fluidly than we do because they have a single currency and because they're on a single landmass. We have an island mentality, and I think that deeply impresses our choices as to how often we choose to move out of the island.
Brexit is another barrier. I mean, it's interesting that people want UK partners in their projects. They're desperate for UK partners. That the UK is the country with apparently the least skills at finding partners. I mean, I'm not saying there are obviously many exceptions to that. But overall, when you have meetings with organisations and you say to them, well, the first thing you need is partners, you can see the sort of look of fear on the basis of particularly of small to middle scale organisations who either haven't got the resources. You go to meetings in continental Europe, and that is not an issue for the points that you've just raised. So there was already a barrier. So Brexit is the danger of creating a sort of reinforcing that barrier and going to make it more difficult for some people to make that step.
I don't know if you can say that about the cultural sector. I don't know many organisations.
Come to my seminars.
I think it reinforces the need to remain connected to networks, and if you are part of networks, find the networks that are of value to you across the European landmass, or global ones for that matter. Because I mean, working with Showcase Scotland and Showcase Scotland Expo, France and Germany at Rudolstadt Festival and L'Oreal said that in 2017 they will be focusing on Scotland. Now they've done that themselves. Yes, they're talking to folk on the ground here, but they've chosen to do that. They're focusing in on Scotland, particularly because of a strength of connection they feel they have to us. And I believe we've got that out of the way as well. So I think we've got to take responsibility for those relationships.
Are there any general questions? I think.
Yeah, I have a question that's very specific, Geoffrey, about if we end up with a Norway or Switzerland model. I can't remember how the funding works, but can we be lead partners in the project? I mean, can we initiate, or are we just then reduced to taking part in nothing in the project? I can't remember whether...
The status of what are called generally the associate partner countries, which includes several categories: Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, waiting for a partner from Liechtenstein, on one side, and then countries who are trying to be members like the ex-Yugoslav countries and so on and so forth. All of those now have the status where they could be either a lead partner or any sort of partner. But the issue about that is that that's one of the other potential negotiating areas. Okay, we may not want to be a full member of the associate member of the signal market in the same way as Norway. What's the next step down? Is the next step down if we don't want to be that, because that implies freedom of movement of citizens and goods and services and capital and all the rest of it. If we don't want that, we're not prepared to go down that particular route because that's not going to be acceptable to the Leave voters, then the next step down may be an arrangement whereby we don't have that particular capacity. So again, it's another thing that's still on the agenda.
I have to say, Fiona, I've put that in the box of things I have absolutely no clue about, so simply aren't going to spend time thinking about yet.
But it's difficult not to think about.
I I
It's
know.
when you're working with European partners, as we are, you're beginning to wonder about doing partnerships, you know, where
But-
are we going to be?
But for the next 2 years, we're full.
But we're not necessarily, we're not, I mean, you know, certainly from our organisation, some smaller organisations, you're not necessarily thinking of those big projects 2 years out, you're thinking about developing news, you're thinking 4 or 5 years down the line. So, you know, so do you start making steps in development, or do you just not bother? I mean, I know there's probably isn't
Yes.
an answer, but
I have to say, most of the organisations who come to the contact points are thinking about the next 12 months in terms of deadlines. Okay, they may have a sort of longer term plan, but they tend to be a little bit more focused on that. I mean, I think that the responsibility of networks and other agencies who have a bigger picture responsibility indeed should be looking at those sorts of issues, and that may be part of the lobbying or the sort of set of 10 points that sort of are the part of the manifesto that one wants to put forward and so on. I agree with that.
But am I right in thinking that if, for example, we go down the Swedish approach to what we want out of the EU and the relationship with the European Union,
Norah.
Norway, in terms of some of the cultural things like Creative Europe funds, some of those that particularly around the sort of our sector that we can dip into, that if we buy into, because we presumably would have to pay into those funds to get any sort of benefit from them. So when there's a negotiation around a fund and we say we want to buy into that fund, then that's the point. You say, well, actually part of the negotiation is around whether or not we can initiate. So I'd imagine it's like layers and layers and layers of detail that will come out, I think, in due course.
There is, I mean, there is a slight difference in opinion over the statistics, but to go down the Norway route, we'd be paying between 75 and 95% of what we pay now. Okay, now that's not going to go down very well with the Leave campaigners, is it? But without paying that amount of money, okay, we would not have access to those programs. I mean, even the former Yugoslav countries, Macedonia and Montenegro, whatever, tiny as they are, they all pay to be eligible to participate in these programs as well. So, again, however, we just don't know how far either the UK government is prepared to argue and how the European Union is prepared to negotiate on these sorts of details. That's one of the challenges at the moment.
Thanks, Geoffrey. Any other questions?
It's one comment, and I think one of the big responsibilities we have is to make sure that it's really attractive for people from Europe to be coming to Scotland projects. And I'm very aware of that, but when we tour in Europe, the level of treatment and the level of audiences and the level of hospitality so far exceeds what we have in the UK. And when I have worked over European partners, it's almost been embarrassing sometimes at some of the venues that there's no welcome at all. There's no cup of tea provided. There's no accommodation. The sound check is horrendous. Just the level of treatment is so much lower, and the level of fees is so much lower, and the level of audience attendance is so significantly lower here than touring places like Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Netherlands. So for us, I know that myself, for us to make money, we have to go to Europe because we can't really make money in our own country. And so I think it's really important that we really work on our own infrastructure here in Scotland as well, develop that and make it more attractive for people to be coming to Scotland and to the UK to perform, and to make it more attractive to be able to bring partners over. Like I've got projects at the moment trying to bring people from Scandinavia, but their expectation levels in terms of fees and accommodation and all those basic things that people need to be comfortable are so much higher than most of our venues and most of our infrastructure can provide. So I think it's great for us to think about what we can export, but it's also really important to think about what we can import and making sure that we're on an equal playing field with places like Germany. And if you take your things are getting over there, you're getting 400 people. Why are we not getting 400 people here for things? Why is it? I'd say about a quarter of the audiences that we get in Europe is what we get over here. More so in Scotland, but in the UK generally. But I think Scotland is particularly bad. I think our touring infrastructure here is really difficult. So I think if we're going to be having these international relationships, then we need to look at the infrastructure that we have for touring models and that the venues have, and that we can offer, what we can actually offer to our international partners is just as important as what they can offer to us.
But one of the things we have going for us, which is really interesting, is that everybody wants a UK partner. The Budapest Cultural Observatory did a survey on how they actually do it, but they analysed the partnership relationships across all the projects funded by the Culture Programme and the New Creative Europe Culture Programme. And they found out that it was only the UK. The UK had the most balanced demand across all the other member states. Okay, there was an equal number of countries who wanted the UK, whereas for other countries, they were sort of tended to either be neighbours or they had sort of language connection or whatever it might be. But everybody wants a UK partner. It's quite an interesting fact.
Ailey, I was just going to ask, when you're saying that you're obviously embarrassed to make people over and the reception's not great, the sound check's not great, why do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's lots of things that can be. I think just the value we place on artists in this country is a lot lower. I think the value we place on music and in culture generally in this country is a lot lower. And I don't know. I mean, it seems so basic to me that if you've got people who travel 8 hours to come to your venue, it would be nice to at least say hello. And sometimes, I mean, I think we can make you feel that we're in the way or they just don't want you to be there, like you're a hassle to them. And it's so sad to have that. And things like, just little things like trying to find venues that have a decent piano that's actually in tune. All those things, to the point where this next project we're running, we've had to scrap on your piano because we cannot find 7 venues in Scotland that have a decent piano, which is kind of ridiculous. And yeah, I think it's the money is so tight that they can't afford it. You know, you arrive at a green room in Germany and there's this enormous spread of, there's wine, there's beer, there's soft drinks, there's a huge spread of food, and it's just a given that that will be there. And you get bottled water in Scotland, you're doing really well.
I'm just going to come back to Susanna, and then there's about 4 other hands that I've seen.
I was going to make a point connected to the value points without opening up the enormous topic of how we value the arts and culture and music in this country, which we could take another week to discuss, so I completely agree with you, but that's for another day. So I think actually, and everyone I think in this room knows why international collaboration and international creative exchange is important, both in terms of creative development, for want of a better word, and also indeed just sort of having a viable living. But the kind of case for why it matters, the value of working internationally, cannot be made too strongly now. And we have to, that in some ways, we can have our list of things that need sorting out, but actually the whole question like that, why does any of that matter? So, you know, why it matters, and actually the value of culture and the value of cultural collaboration, the value of cultural diversity across Europe, you know, that case needs to be made more strongly than ever. And we kind of not only have to make the case, we kind of have to embody it. And I agree, there's a massive role for networks, for institutional sort of structures, cooperation across Europe. There's also so much that can be done at the grassroots as well, because I think artists, composers, musicians are sort of naturally kind of curious people who are interested in meeting other people. So in some ways now is the time for us to kind of really sort of step up and sort of live that aspect, I think, to try and get the value of this over to the people trying to negotiate whatever happens next.
Now there was a couple of people here.
I think, talking partnership-wise, I think a lot of people don't realise, which might be on the radar, is 2018 is the year of it's one is the year of youth, and it's also the European Championships are coming to Glasgow. And at the current moment in time, there's a director of cultural programming. The job advertisement was just out, I think, this week, and there's going to be the citywide is going to be a model like the Commonwealth Games, to bring a lot of partnership working together. And the host partnership city with Glasgow is Berlin, and there's going to be room for a lot of partnership working and a lot of kind of tapping into areas there. So in terms of a bit of positivity around this whole kind of conversation, is definitely for people in the room, it's something to keep on your radar. As the company that I work for just now, we are already very much in the process of working towards that. That is where we are working to, is 2018. So it's something to kind of keep on your radar. I know that it's certainly going to open up a lot of opportunities. For example, we've got a guitar and mandolin group from Berlin and Brandenburg coming over in October, and we are talking with them now about, right, who can we send out to Berlin to start up some kind of wee partnership there to actually take us on to 2018. So there's lots of opportunities coming up for 2018 as well. It's something to keep on your radar. And kind of, I don't hear you give your sound checks and things like that, and experiences. Certainly, I'm not aware of it as being bad as from what you're hearing, but I think part of the work, Celtic connections and other things like that as well. But I think I need to say, I think from working in the kind of promoter and programming industry, from what I'm seeing is from my kind of maybe 4 years in the industry now, is a lot of organisations don't really talk to each other, and there's ways of kind of we all kind of do one thing, and there's ways of actually getting together and putting together bits of funding, kind of dipping into each other's pots and making things actually happen on a better and bigger scale to support these artists and make things happen. Because I think I know I've got a few friends who are in the kind of smaller promoter programming industry and smaller venues, and it is hard for them to get funding, and it is hard to support, and when you do come in and you've got like I was at a gig recently, and it was like a 20-year-old sound engineer who couldn't manage to fix his feedback on the piano, and for the whole gig it was just like he was getting this feedback sound through the whole gig. It's like because they haven't got the funding or they haven't got the kind of necessary materials to get decent sound engineers and various things like that. So I think there's ways to work around it and kind of start discussing more. And because I would love to see a promoters network, like a promoters network that can support, that people like new composers in this room can come and talk to us and go, how can we make a commission happen? You know, how can we support the Red Ensemble, which we do. We support these groups, and then a wee bit of funding comes in from here. We support by a little bit, and it all just kind of works. So I think there's room for discussion there, but certainly for 2018, I definitely say keep an eye out for the European Youth Championships. It's going to be a big one, and there's certainly going to be a lot of partnership opportunities.
Thanks. I'm just going to go over here for any questions. Not much time.
It wasn't a question.
Or a statement, whatever.
I think it's what Campbell was saying about artists and the impact of Brexit, and we're supporting artists with projects on. And without Brexit, by far and away, what I see as being a risk is the badge of honour that both the promoters, managers and the artists have of trying to work too hard for too long. And it's not about working hard and giving an excellent standard, it's actually the status quo of how far we push ourselves and the edge that we're constantly dancing towards the end of. And I think sort of mental health issues, exhaustion, burnout are always going to be of interest to me, and just seeing what Brexit plays, coming back to your question of identity. And I think identity is very much an individual thing, and anxiety is such an issue in the sense of the self and who you are. And in order to do our best work, we need to be happy and secure and grounded, haven't we? So I don't know if Brexit's going to be good for that or bad for that. It could actually be good. We could start as a sector saying, well, these are the lines in the sand. We do not belong out it anymore. Or as Amy was saying, you know, why are some receiving venues under such pressure that they can't give a warm welcome? So I think there's sort of those ongoing questions for me, and it will just be fascinating to see if Brexit kickstarts as a sector to actually try and instigate some changes.
That's exactly what I've been hearing. I said in my introduction that some of the anxiety caused by Brexit is not new anxiety. It's shining a light on the fragility and that sense of being on the edge, which is the reality of living an artistic creative life for the vast majority of people in that sector. So, yeah, you're right. The sort of positive way of looking at that is actually, can we actually address this at heart? And it's almost Brexit just it's shone a light on something that's there already. Maybe this is the time to look at it and take it more seriously. Because I agree, it's sort of, I think it's pushing people to the edge too often.
Thank you. We've probably got time more. Hi.
Just on a practical note, as a touring musician, our organisations planning further than 2 years ahead, planning to work in Europe, factoring in work visas into the budgets. I'm going to America halfway through
be working with musicians who will not get visas. Some of them will not be allowed into the country, into our country, and that's happened. There was a conference in Edinburgh during the festival about teaching art, and trying to get some of our special speakers in to that was very difficult, and we know of about 2 or 3 who were refused entry into the UK, and you know, and the reasons given were, we don't believe you'll leave. And so once that's been said, that's set in stone, you can't get that person in, you can't appeal it. So if your programme is relying on bringing somebody with particular talent, skill, or musical kind of genre you want to celebrate, then you have to be prepared to lose folk from your programme. So there's a lot to think about that going forward.
And that's a government hearing difficult for European artists. Should we for that reciprocal agreement?
Yeah, right.
The difficulty is that, again, within the negotiations, one can imagine that again, the arts sector is not going to be the only sector concerned about visa-free travel. Okay, visa-free travel, whether it's within the single market or an arrangement with the single market, or an arrangement we don't call an arrangement with the single market, whatever it is, visa-free travel is going to be something that a great many other sectors are going to be very keen to see continue. I'm not saying it will. I mean, that's certainly not guaranteed. But again, I think it's an area where we need to be careful about developing the alliances to support the others, or to work together to support the argument about the devastating impact that the introduction of visas would have on the economy, including, in particular, certain sectors that we're particularly concerned about.
Maybe one last comment, if there is any questions. Probably should think about that one. It's quarter past 1 maybe. But I don't think I'd expected us to get any concrete answers, because there's so many different questions and uncertainties. But I think there's potentially lots of things that we can be doing, and like people are genuinely talking about being proactive and doing more ourselves, and making sure that we create ideas for lobbying and what is important within the arts sector that people pay attention to. And I know you were mentioning earlier, Susanna, about potentially collating ideas and things that people are really strongly passionate about. And is there a way that you would want to do that? People have got ideas here to be able to be in touch.
Well, it could be something, absolutely, or it could be something that New Music Scotland, I think, could have a real role in that as well. But I think, and there is, as you said, there's work going on in the sort of British Council, the Arts Councils, etc. But maybe specifically in new music, it could be something that between Sound of Music and New Music Scotland, we could try and draw together a really sort of short, clear, simple thing. And I think the whole question about the kind of value, making the value case about why this matters, is something we should work on as well.
And I think the questions around visas that are concerning people, and as Geoffrey rightly said, that's going to be a shared concern. The same with you mentioned about touring being part of your business plan to be able to succeed as an individual in your art form. That is trade and business. That's the creative industries. Those are the same issues that many other small businesses will face across the UK going forward. So we need to join together where we can in those trains of thought.
I think it's really important that we accept that some of the government-funded agencies, and I'm speaking about Arts Council England, this is specifically here, but I fear that other government-funded agencies are going to have some constraints on the arguments or the strength of the arguments that they can make in this area, which is completely understandable, okay, given the situation. I'm sure they will do the best they can, because at the baseline, I'm sure Creative Scotland and other organisations share the same sort of concerns that people in this room have. I think it's really
constraints.
Well, there were some meetings before the referendum campaign about looking at both sides of the argument, and I know that some of those organisations declined invitations to attend because they didn't feel that they could be participating in a debate that might be seen as politically motivated. That's happened in England. I'm not saying it's happened anywhere else, but it certainly happened that organisations felt that they couldn't participate because of that. Maybe things are all now rosy, but I sort of feel that particularly as the negotiations, I mean, at the moment there's nothing going on, frankly, but as the negotiations start getting a little bit more specific, and there are arguments being made on both sides, and there are editorials, and there's all the rest of it, I feel that there may be some constraints on some of those official organisations. Hopefully not. Okay? The point I was going to make was to go on and say that's why it's really important to do two things. One is to support the independent networks, such as New Music Scotland and any others that you happen to be part of, to support them in the positions that they can take and the feedback that they can make into the situation. And the others is to simply, support anybody else, particularly some of the more radical people out there who are doing their blogs and whatever else it might be about some of these debates, and making sure that those arguments are being circulated as widely as possible to engage as many of the people as possible, to then feed in either to the independent networks or into the more official ones. I think that sort of lobbying, surge, is going to be absolutely crucial over the next